Hello, my name is Tyler, and I'm going to be going through the things that I worked on for this project. First, we'll be starting with the functionality, ends, and like what kind of stuff I worked on, and then we'll be going through all the different assets that I worked on, and then I'm going to kind of explain how I went about designing the barricade scene that I created in this game, and kind of show the flow and the message, or like what I'm trying to convey with kind of how I set things up in a sense. We'll get into more of that stuff later, but first let's go ahead and start off with what I worked on functionally. So we got a couple things. I worked on the hollow pad, the crowbar, flashlight, and the crowbar works with like how like the wooden planks break and doors open and whatnot. So first, this is what. Oops. Anyway, first I worked on the interface of how the hollow pads look. Here's what the hollow pads look like, and then we'll go ahead and get into the functionality of set hollow pads. So first of all, checks to make sure that you press the hollow pad, or let me explain. The hollow pad press, this is checking to see if you're within the radius of being able to interact with the hollow pad. And if that's true, then it'll go ahead and make the hollow pad pop up on your screen. And it'll add it to your viewport, and it'll set your game to pause. And to unset your game to pause, all you have to do is press escape, unsets the game to pause, and it will remove, or it will hide the widget. And so originally we were going to use remove all widgets because this is what we're more familiar with. But the problem is we had our icon that's keeping track of how many space parts that you've collected, and so if we use that, it would remove all of them. So instead, we use set visibility to hidden just to hide this single one because we didn't know how else to do that. On event actor begin overlap, it's checking for multiple things. First, we have like the hollow pad, like I said before, making sure you're within the range of the hollow pad, and if you are, it'll set that to true. And down here at the bottom, we also have event actor end on overlap for the hollow pad. So if you step out of its range, it'll set it to false, so that way you can't just open it up when you're like 20 feet away from it. And now we have the flashlight. So if you go over the flashlight, it'll make sure that it's set. You have the flashlight to true. Destroy the actor. Same thing with the crowbar. And yes, let's go explain those stuff. So first, the flashlight's pretty easy. You make sure you have the flashlight. Is the flashlight on or off? This is what it's checking for. And if it's off, it'll turn it on. And if it's on, it'll turn it off. And with that, we just targeted the spotlight attached to the character and set the intensity of the flashlight. Nothing too complicated there. And now if we go down here into the crowbar, it's going to check you have the crowbar. And then here we are checking to see, we're getting the BP wooden plank from our class filter here. And if you press E on it, it's going to destroy the planks. It's going to activate this custom event. And can the door be open that you destroy the planks on will be set to true. And so let's go ahead inside our BP wooden planks here. So here we just have our initial location, and we are changing it with this timeline. Here you can set the distance of how far it's moving, how long it takes to get there, and move like how fast and slow it moves at certain points on the timeline. So if we go back to our event graph, we're setting the relative location of the cube, which is based on the timeline. So we're taking initial location, adding our new track from the timeline, and it'll set the relative location of the object. This you can ignore, we're not using that. Here I did have a couple of issues on the destroy plank custom event. So for applied damage, apparently it's a lot more stable than one that I was originally using, which is called apply radial damage. Apply radial damage applies damage how you think it, like from the center outwards. And for whatever reason, radial damage can be very buggy and annoying sometimes and just doesn't work. And that's the issues I was having. And I figured out that applied damage works a lot more consistently for what I was trying to do. And so we are using applied damage for this instead of radial damage. So on destroy planks, what we have here is we have our destructible mesh that's inside our blueprint. And so we are setting simulate physics to true on that, so that way it's breakable. We are applying our damage, and then we have get actor forward vector, which is basically using determining what the impulse direction of the pieces is. And then our getting actor location is just, we're just getting the actor that we're using, its location to determine what's getting hit. And then we have the damage that's being applied to it. And impulse strength is determining how fast the pieces will fly apart, essentially. And if we go back to BP gravity character, there's a couple of other things here that we could show off. This is the door. It determines when the door opens. You press Q, make sure the door can be opened. And if you open the door, it'll set it back to false. And then it'll go ahead and activate that custom event we were just talking about. And then this is just making sure that you're within range of being able to break the planks. So I think that's everything for the functionality wise. And so let's go into the assets I created real quick. I'll just kind of sift through them pretty quickly. So here's the comm relay that I created. We got our nice cool spaceship. And then if we go back out here, all of these assets I created: the bench, camping tent, LMG, log. Got our mortar shell, rifle, sandbag, and then we have 3 different variants of the sandbag stacked together. And then we also have our tank. So now if I go into the scene and kind of show you the stuff that I worked on, and then I'll explain the flow and kind of how my thought process behind creating the scene. So here we have a little defensive barricade that's defending the industrial city that's over in that direction. And so we got some nice turned over tanks or grounded tanks that got caught or exploded or whatever. And then if I actually go ahead and click play, because right now all the bodies are really stiff because I took the character that Brennan made and I just spawned in other versions of him with the skeletal mesh and turned on simulate physics, so that way they'd be in these positions of kind of dead bodies everywhere. And so we have some of them mounted up on fell over on their LMG or something, and this guy fell through the hole in the sandbag barrier and whatnot. So my thought process was we'd have a couple of guys up in the front because obviously they're retreating back to their defenses from another location. So you got a couple of guys in the front, and then as you go kind of more and more back, you got quite a few guys here up on the front line, and then another guys in the open area as they were retreating backwards more towards the second line, which is kind of much smaller because their defenses would get kind of weaker as you went backwards a little bit as they retreated back. So we're gonna put a holopad here, so this is the last surviving guy of the front assault, and a little depiction of just kind of what's going on in the world along with where he died, which I thought it'd be interesting to kind of show off. Just have a calm location, much more a civilized place in the middle of such a chaotic event that's been going on, and maybe having a holopad here with it, which I thought would be pretty cool. So we made this little place right here, and then as we go back, I made this little tank graveyard right here as well to kind of just fill in some more gaps that just didn't have too much stuff in it yet. And then I added on the sandbags and the sandbag barricades to these industrial buildings just to kind of give them more personality. And so you got some like mounted LMGs up here, an AR, same thing over here, got a nice mounted barricade along over here. And then the kind of what I was kind of going for with the feel of this was sort of like an evacuation where like the front line's trying to hold out as much as possible, give them time to evacuate. And so as you can see, the defenses keep going further and further back. And what I wanted to do, but we just didn't have enough time, was make like a spaceship, like maybe a down spaceship in this green area or maybe in the ocean. So kind of like hinting towards the player that like what was going on, that they were the military was trying to evacuate people to get like off of this peninsula and ultimately get off of the planet. Which is kind of how the game was designed for the most part, is like create an environment and a level that kind of the player can come to like their own conclusions, like, oh, like, is this some sort of evacuation, or like what's going on here? So they kind of come up with like their own conclusions, and then with the holo tape or the holo pads, then we can kind of fill in the gaps of like the stuff that they're already suspecting is going on, to kind of like discover what's really happening in this planet. Essentially, at least that was the goal for like this kind of design. All right, I think that's everything asset wise. I was gonna show 2 of my songs, but I'm just going to show one because I recorded this once before and I lost 15 minutes of footage, and I don't really feel like going back and explaining the other one. So we're just going to talk about the game theme that I created, kind of my process of how I create songs for the most part. So let's go ahead and just zoom in here a little bit, and I'll start like playing through it and kind of explaining it as I'm going on. So this part you're hearing at the beginning, the first like pattern 1 and pattern 2, what I usually do is I start on my piano to find a tune that I really, really like, and then I bring that into FL Studios. So that part, I literally found like a nice chord that I liked and started just kind of playing around with it. So I started off with like that. I'm like, ooh, this sounds really cool. I feel like I can do something with this. And then I went ahead and started like the melody part. Like, you kind of get the idea. So I started off with that, and then I brought in FL Studios, and then I created like more patterns that would be usable for the song. Right here's the transition. I really like the low kind of techie vibe that it has. And then for a song like this, when I was making it, it didn't need much percussion at all. Just a nice low bass, which is what you're hearing right now, to kind of keep the song flowing. I really like how it turned out. That's what track 6 is the bass. You'll hear me use this lower part as like a transition a lot for the song. Not like a lot, but 2 or 3 times in the song. And then right here, just wanted to change up a little bit. We got a nice low chord progression going along with that little part going on, and then we go back into like the melody. was everything I wanted to discuss. So I do think that was everything I wanted to discuss. This is the other song that I worked on real quick. So basically with this song, I'll just show like really quick portions of it because I don't feel like going through it like a second time after losing so much footage. But like I said, like this beginning part right here started off on the piano, and then I added in more stuff as I brought it into FL Studios. And then this is kind of like the transition part of the song. If I can just start off here. So that's like the transition into like the two different parts of the song. So this part's very different than the first part of it. The whole intent of this song was kind of something to be used for like an end game. For like an end game kind of song, for a boss or something like that, or like the final moments of the game. I originally I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. Because I just like found something cool. I'm like, I'm just gonna kind of go like work on it and see where it goes. Unfortunately, we don't really have a place in the game for this song right now. But if we did go, if we kept going with it, it would definitely be used if for in some sort of like intense moment of the game or something like that. Yeah, I don't need to go through like the entire thing, but I will show off real quick. I also added this like cool effect that makes it a little more space sounding, which is like right here. That little part there I liked a lot. So this video is already long enough. It's already the second time doing it, so I am going to cut it there. Oh, I don't need a VPN right now, so I'm going to cut it right there. Hopefully the processes that I go through don't sound insane or anything. That's just the way how I thought about it for the most part. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and that is all. Thanks for watching.